What's going on? This is Ryan with Automatic Comics, and up next we are going to go over the top 10 surprising sales I saw last week. Stay tuned. Alright, so before we get started, please remember to hit that like button and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. If you haven't seen one of these videos before, just a quick recap. What I do is I watch the weekly Heritage comic auction. I price out usually between 150 to 200 books per week, and then I pick out 5 books that surprise me on the high end and 5 books that surprise me on the low end. I just think these are a little more interesting because you get that high end perspective and the low end perspective, so you can maybe see which books are hitting some new records as well as which books are failing to hit those records. Now, the low sales, it could be somebody just got a great deal, or it could be that that book is trending down. But with that, let's get into these. And the first book, number 10 on this list, it is a low sale. It's a book I've talked about recently in one of my trending down videos. This is Amazing Fantasy number 15 with a CGC 2.5 that sold for just $28,800. This was also a White Pages copy, and so those books often do go for some amount of a premium, and so it's an even bigger deal, in my opinion, that this one went for such a low number. Now, $28,800 is a lot of money, but with where this book has been earlier this year, this is a big step down. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $36,000. This was 20% below that estimate. The record on GPA is $52,800, but if you actually click on that sale, it was a Heritage sale, and you go to the site and it says not sold. This is really rare for Heritage. You do not see this very often, that you have a book that I'm guessing it meant the person chose not to pay or didn't pay. I don't know how Heritage handles that, if they just ban the person from buying ever again or how that works, but that one actually didn't sell, which means the record is actually $45,550 from January of this year, and this book has generally been trending down since then. This is a 37% drop from that record earlier this year. Now, like I showed in the trending down video, this isn't limited to just this grade. This book has been trending down across all grades. And actually, I had mentioned that I felt in the lower grades this book would probably get down to around $12,000 per point. And this sale is actually a little below that, because at a 2.5, $12,000 per point would be $30,000. So at $28,800, a little below $12,000 per point. Now, Bry's Comics did a video recently that touched on this, and I thought he made some really good points in that video. One of them being that over the prior year, there really hadn't been nearly as many copies of this book that had come up for sale. But with the huge spike in prices, we have seen way more copies come up for sale this year, and that is likely leading to now this decline in prices, because people grabbed those books when they came up, but then more and more started coming up, and so you had that little bit of saturation in prices, and so now we're seeing them drop again. To me, for this book, if you have been looking to add an Amazing Fantasy 15, it is time to put that book on your watch list. It could definitely come down more. Totally, that is possible, especially given current market conditions, all that kind of thing. But it is down quite a bit from where it had been, and so it is worthwhile to keep an eye on this book because it is really the #1 Silver Age key, and so it's only going to go down so far, and even if it overcorrects some, it's going to likely snap back up. Now, I do also like to give some alternatives for these books, and so generally the alternative would be Amazing Spider-Man #1. But if you look at that book, it is still trending up in a lot of grades. And so I would steer clear of Amazing Spider-Man #1 for right now, because I expect it to probably do something very similar to Amazing Fantasy 15 and take a pretty hard drop. So right now, no real alternatives for this book. But if you have the budget, if you've been looking for an Amazing Fantasy 15, I think it's getting to that time where it is really worthwhile to keep an eye out for it. All right, now number 9. This is a high sale. This was Incredible Hulk #1 with a CGC 4.0 that sold for a record $38,400. We've got some big books on this list tonight. This is one of them. There's a couple more coming up. This is the first appearance of the Hulk, first appearance of Bruce Banner. This is this early Hulk run. I've talked about this a number of times. These first 6 issues over the last 6 to 8 months have really been spiking, and I've warned to be cautious about this because it feels very similar to what we've seen with hundreds of other books over the last year. Same thing I just talked about with Amazing Fantasy 15. We saw these big ramp ups, these spikes, and FOMO kicks in. And then as more books come to market, because people that own those books see how much they're getting, they then start to drop again. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $30,000. This was 28% above my estimate. The prior record was $16,501 all the way back in 2014. After that, it actually dropped. It went down to around 11,000, and last year it had a sale of 15,600. And so that's where you can see with some of these books, they don't really move all that much over some long periods of time, and so that's why these big spikes that we've seen recently are really out of line for what you would normally see. So from that prior record, this was a jump of 132%, and from the high of 2021, it's a jump of 146%. Now, this isn't quite as much as what we've seen in some other books where we see 200, 300% jumps, so it might not have quite as big of a correction, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have some pullback on this book as well. Now, this one does have a lower total census count than a lot of the other major Marvel Silver Age keys, so that might protect it a little bit, but still, I would be cautious with these first 6 issues because they have gotten very, very expensive over the last, like I said, about 6 to 8 months. Now, for alternatives for this one, there is a great alternative in Hulk 102. I think that is really the way to go with this one. Hulk number 2, which is his second appearance in the first Green Hulk, is also very expensive. So I would jump to Hulk 102, which is basically when the Hulk title restarted. I think it was in 1968, something around there. Similar to what was done with Submariner number 1 and Iron Man number 1, where they got their own self-titled series again, but they didn't start at issue number 1. It just continued from the Tales to Astonish run, and they just started going from Tales to Astonish 101 to Incredible Hulk 102. Now, this book, you can get a mid-grade copy for around $300, which when you compare to Iron Man and the Submariner runs, that's a steal. And so I think that Hulk 102 is a pretty reasonable book to buy and is really undervalued compared to a lot of the other similar keys that had those restarts at number 1. All right, now number 8, this is a low sale, another big Silver Age key. This is Tales to Astonish number 27 with a CGC 3.0 that sold for just $2,340. This is the first appearance of Hank Pym, who ultimately becomes Ant-Man. He gets his costume, the first costume appearance, 8 issues later in issue 35, but that's also his second appearance. He doesn't have any appearances from 28 to 34, and so he's in 27 and then he's again in 35. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $3,000. This was 22% below that estimate. The record from March of this year was $4,000, and it has been trending down ever since then. This is a drop of 41% from that high sale earlier this year. But similar to Hulk number 1, this book has a very low census count. It's one of the few Marvel Silver Age first appearances that has that 10-cent price on the cover. But I think this book is a pretty solid pickup regardless. It's definitely one to put on that watch list if you can get it for around $1,000 per grade point. And this was well under that. So I think this person probably just had a pretty good deal on it. But if you're looking for a more affordable alternative, I think another great book that really, I'm always surprised how cheap it is Marvel Premiere number 47. This is the first appearance of Scott Lang as Ant-Man. It's not Scott Lang's first appearance, but it is his first appearance as Ant-Man. A 9.4 of this book is around $300. A 9.8 is around $1,000. And considering that's really the face of the Ant-Man franchise right now, I think that is a great deal. And I could see this being a book that does continue to go back up as we get more of Ant-Man in the MCU. All right, now number 7, we're jumping over to DC for this one. This is a high sale. This is Showcase number 8 that had a record sale for a CGC 3.5 of $2,340. I love this cover. I really like the early Flash Showcase covers, except for issue number 4. I am not a fan of Barry Allen's first appearance in issue number 4. That cover just doesn't really work for me, but I really like his other appearances in the Showcase run, including this one. Now, this isn't just the second appearance of Barry Allen as the Flash, it is also the first appearance of one of his major villains, Captain Cold. I had estimated the price of this book at $1,600. This was 46% above that estimate. prior record was 1,632 from last year, and a 3.0 sold for 1,380 just in June. So this was a big sale for this book. It beat that prior record by 43%. Big jump. And honestly, DC books have been pretty safe books to buy right now, because if you're concerned about price corrections, a lot of the stuff that we've been seeing with the Marvel books, the DC books didn't really participate nearly as much in the comic boom over the last year, and so they also aren't really pulling back as much. Now, there are a few exceptions. There are some DC books that spiked a lot last year, and there are some that are pulling back some, but for the most part, on average, these DC books didn't spike last year, and so they're just kind of following the same normal trends. And so they are pretty safe if you're worried about pullbacks in these comics. Now, as an alternative, I think this is a great book if you're a Flash fan. I wouldn't really go for alternatives. I think it's still too cheap, really, for what it is, being that second appearance and having that major first appearance of Captain Cold. But if you're looking for maybe some Captain Cold alternatives, there are a ton of very affordable Captain Cold covers and appearances in the Silver Age. The Flash run, the Silver Age Flash run, is actually really affordable other than a few major keys. So I'd definitely just go and check those out and see if there's a cool cover that you're interested in and pick that up. All right, number 6. Now this is a low sale. This is Archie's Madhouse number 22 with a CGC 5.5 that sold for just $840. Now, if you're not familiar with this relatively obscure title and obscure cover, this actually has a pretty well-known first appearance in it. This is the first appearance of Sabrina the Teenage Witch, a staple from Nickelodeon for, I'm sure, many of us in our childhoods. I know I watched that show when I was a kid. Now, this is also a show that it had a recent resurgence because there was a relatively popular show that I think it was on Netflix. I don't remember. I tried watching it. I watched, I think, the first couple seasons, and I did not like the actors acting that was playing Sabrina, so I just ended up giving up on it. But that definitely caused a new renewed spike in the prices for this book. Now, this is a book that is very difficult to come across. There are only 200 universal copies on the census, and it is extremely rare in anything outside of garbage condition. It's very similar to what you see with Scooby-Doo number 1, the first appearance of Scooby and all those characters. It's a book that just is pretty uncommon and does not have very many copies out there that are presentable. And a 5.5, believe it or not, is a very presentable copy for this book. Now, I had estimated the price at $1,100. This was 24% below my estimate, but the record for this book was $1,500 back in 2019, likely because of that Netflix show, and this is a drop of 44% from that peak price. But honestly, I think this person probably just got a steal on this book. It's an in-demand book, a lot of collectors want it, and this is a very nice condition copy. But it is expensive, you aren't going to come across it very often, so if you're looking for an alternative, I would recommend Sabrina the Teenage Witch number 1 from 1971. I think that's a great option. Mid-grade copy will cost you around $200 to $300, and you actually have her on the cover of that issue. All right, now number 5, we're finally getting back to Marvel here. This is a high sale. This was Conan the Barbarian, number 24, with a CGC 9.6 that sold for $900. This is the first cover appearance of Red Sonja. Her first appearance is just one issue earlier in issue 23. Issue 23 is quite a bit more expensive than this one, though. That is definitely the preferred key for this character. But this book really, really spiked last year when we had the comic boom, but there was also an announcement that there was going to be a movie and they had an actress cast. But since then, I believe the actress has left that movie, and I haven't heard anything about it since then. I don't know if it's canceled or what's going on with that. But this book has been trending down ever since, and so this was a pretty big surprise sale. I had estimated the price of this book at $580. This was 55% above my estimate. Now, this wasn't the record. The record was $1,300 from last year during that boom, but regardless, this was still a very strong sale for this book. Now, personally, if you've been looking to pick up something like issues 23 or 24, if you like going after those Red Sonja keys, I'd probably keep watching and wait to see if it trends down more. This is a book that I could easily see completely retracing to its prices from last year. And for issues 23 and 24, in a lot of grades, they have actually gotten close to that. So it's probably about where you might want to be picking it up, but you could probably wait a little bit longer. You might get a little better price. But if you're looking for an alternative to this, I mean, personally, I'd probably go for issues 23 or 24. but you've also got her first solo story in Marvel Feature #1, or you can go for her first solo title in Red Sonja #1. Those are more affordable options, but personally, if you're going for those, I'd go for a high grade. I'd be aiming for 9/8. Otherwise, I'd go for issues 23 or 24 of the Conan run. All right, now number 4, this is a low sale, another big book here. This is Fantastic Four #48 with a CGC 3.5 that sold for just $1,320. This book has seen some really big corrections since last year, but it had also spiked an absolute ton. So I think it's always important to put that in perspective, because I remember in 2020, I bought a copy of this book in a 5.5 for just $900. So this book is still up a lot from where it was, but it has retreated quite a bit from its peak prices of the comic boom. Now, this is the first appearance of Silver Surfer, it's the first cameo appearance of Galactus, so this is a major Silver Age book. And there was a lot of speculation over the last year that we'd see these characters in the MCU, but that could either never happen or could be years out. There's no way to know, and I think until we get some more news that might actually confirm that, you'll likely see some flattening or continued decline with this book, as well as issue 49. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $1,750. This was 25% below that estimate, but the record was $3,120 from 2021. But I think you can largely ignore that sale. That was a really high spike, out of line with a lot of the other sales. It had generally been going for around $2,400 to $2,500 at its peak. But regardless, this is a 58% drop from that peak price, so it's retreated quite a bit from where it was. Now, this is definitely a book, like I said, that got a little too hot, too fast last year, but it's also one that's on my watch list. I wouldn't mind getting back a pretty nice copy of this one if I get a chance, so it's definitely one that I'll be looking for as I see prices come down. Now, there are a ton of great alternatives for the Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer 1, his first solo series, has dropped considerably. It's still expensive though, so you could go for some of the later Fantastic Four issues where he's featured on the cover. For example, Fantastic Four 72 is just one of those classic Silver Surfer covers, a real big favorite, and a mid-grade copy is only going to cost you around $200 to $300. All right, now number 3. It's a high sale, and we've got Archie on here again. I don't usually put Archie on here multiple times, but I had been seeing some pretty crazy sales over the last about month with Archie books. And so this is Archie's Girls, Betty and Veronica, number 41, that had a CGC 5.0, sold for a record of $504. Now, like I said, on Heritage, I've been seeing some big Archie sales lately. There've got to be a couple collectors that have been looking to add those books, because consistently I'm seeing these Golden Age books often, but now this is a Silver Age book, sell for some big numbers that are out of line for what I was normally expecting. And so because I noticed that, I thought this would be a good book to bring up, because I'd seen that and I thought it might be interesting for others to know that these Archie books are getting a little more attention again. Now, I had estimated the price of this book at $250. This was 101% above my estimate. Now, there was no prior sale in this grade specifically, so it was definitely a record by default, but based on some other sales, that's where I came up with my estimate. Now, this is just one of those classic Betty and Veronica Silver Age covers, but you don't usually see big jumps like this in Archie books, and that's why these have really stuck out to me over the last month or so. Now, for example, what I've seen with some of these other sales, Archie number 50, which is one of the most in-demand Archie books, the classic Good Girl Betty cover, that one had a massive sale a few weeks ago, a huge record for a 3.0. It was like $2,200 or $2,300, which is a massive sale for that book. So definitely some renewed demand for Archie books. But if you're looking to pick up Archie, if you're looking to get into those, they have been around for a long time. There are a ton of different titles that carry those characters' names. So if you're interested in that type of content, I would just go start looking around, find some covers that you think are fun, that you'd like to go after, and then just start looking for them. Now remember, in the Golden Age, Archie started with Pep Comics, and so that's where you're going to find some of the really early Archie appearances. All right, now number 2. This was a low sale, another big Silver Age key. This is Fantastic Four number 1 with a CGC 0.5 that was incomplete, missing the centerfold, that sold for $5,160. So this is 0.5, and $5,000 may sound like a lot, but this is a big drop from the peak of where this book has sold. I had estimated the price at $7,500. This was 31% below that estimate, but the record was actually $9,000 from January of this year, and that is a drop of 54% from that record. Now, is this an example of another big Silver Age key that got a little too far ahead of itself? Probably. In most grades, it's up 150 to 200% from where it was about a year to 2 years ago. So that is a big jump for a book that's this expensive. It had that massive sale of $1.5 million for, I can't remember, was it a 9.2 or a 9.4 earlier this year. So that probably caused some FOMO with this as well. But regardless, I still think this was a pretty big steal because this book in 2020 was going for around $4,000. And so going for $5,160, just 25% or so more than it was, I think that seems like a steal for this book. Also considering for a 0.5, yeah, it's missing the centerfold, but actually presents really well. So it's a nice presenting 0.5, went for near its 2020 price. I think whoever got this just got it for a great price. But I do think it's possible that some of the Fantastic Four books have gotten a little overheated, and so we've been seeing some pullbacks in a lot of those early issues, including 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And so if you've been looking for those, I would definitely be putting them on your watch list because I think you'll have a chance to get them for a little better price. Now, things will likely spike with Submariner going into the Black Panther movie, but I would expect those books to drop after that. No matter how well received that movie or that character is, it's just going to be part of that standard price drop following a movie. So I wouldn't rush out and pick up that book if you don't already own it. But with all those early Fantastic Four books right now, we're seeing some downtrends with them. So if you've been looking to pick them up, if you'd been waiting, it's worthwhile to at least put them on your watch list right now. All right, now number 1, finally some Golden Age. I don't think I've had any Golden Age on this list until this one. This is the high sale, the most surprising high sale that I saw. And honestly, this was the most surprising sale I saw entirely across the entire Heritage auction, at least for the books that I was tracking. This was Beyond number 25 with the CGC 6.5 that sold for a record $10,200. Now, this is a genre of books, these pre-code horror books, that have been fighting the downtrend that we've been seeing in a lot of other titles. I have continued to see records and big sales for these pre-code horror books. This is from Ace Magazines. It's a little more obscure title, but this Beyond run has some great covers in it. The ones that are really the most in demand are issues number 1, which is a werewolf cover, and then issues number 25 and 27, which are these skull or skeleton covers. But regardless, this was a massive sale for this book. I had estimated the price at $3,500. This was 191% above my estimate. Just huge. Now, there was no prior sale in this grade, but a 4.0 sold for $900 last year. And so this is a book that has just, it ramps up as the grades get higher, just huge jumps in value. But this isn't even the top of the census. There is an 8.0 and a 7.0. This is number 3 on the census, so it's high up there, but it's not even top of census and went for $10,200, so just a monster sale. Now, another reason I was watching this one is if you've watched my unboxings that I did from CGC submissions earlier this year, I have a 5.5 of Beyond number 27, which is one of the other skull covers from this run. And so this sale was really interesting to me because it's something that I can use as kind of a corollary with that book, because honestly, when you talk about books that are this rare like this, you can't always just look at sales within that one book. You sometimes have to look at other books around it as well that are similar. But I've talked about alternatives for Golden Age pre-code horror before. It's hard to really say go for this one book or that other book because Golden Age pre-code horror, they're very popular largely for what's on that cover. Now you can go for similar books like I talked about with issues 25 and 27, but one of the things I've talked about a number of times is I recommend getting these books, these Gerber photojournals. And so there's a couple of them. There's A through J and then K through Z. I always just have them here, and if you're not familiar with these, they're basically just page after page of like every Golden Age cover. Now, they aren't all in here, but it's a lot of them. And so they're really good references if you're looking to get into Golden Age. I highly recommend it. You can flip through them, you can see which covers interest you, which runs interest you, because a lot of times you'll see books that maybe you've never even seen before. So I really recommend picking those up. You can get them used usually on Amazon or eBay or that kind of thing. They're pretty expensive new, like I think like 50 to 70 bucks a piece, but you can get them used for a little bit cheaper. And so I'd recommend getting those if you're interested in getting into Golden Age books. Really will help you familiarize yourself with the titles and some of those covers that are just really cool that are out there. Now, the one thing I've noticed is that they aren't the end-all be-all for rarity on books, because, for example, in the Beyond run, it actually says that Beyond 25 and 27 are relatively common for the Golden Age, but they are not. These books do not come up for sale. They are extremely rare. And so there are things where they talk about the rarity where I think they're a little off. And that's where things like the CGC census are actually, I think of the CGC census as the new Gerber scarcity index. Now, it's not perfect because people are only going to grade books that have value. But when you're talking about books like this that are selling for $10,200 for a 6.5, they have a ton of value and people will grade them if they exist. And I think this book only has something like 17 copies or 12 copies on the census. It's extremely rare. And so that's where there are some flaws with their rarity, but with the pictures and everything like that, if you want to use that for reference, still, they are fantastic. So definitely recommend picking those up if you're interested in getting into the Golden Age. All right, so those are the 10 surprising sales that I saw this week. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you saw some cool books, maybe learned something about some current trends going on in the comic market right now. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see more content like this. I've got more videos over here if you'd like to watch some of my other videos, and the subscription button right here. If you'd like to subscribe to the channel, I'd really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next video.